I'm doing the sequel today, and I'm going to talk about some very serious problems, which are the overall state of the health of our planet and of ourselves. You know, we have health reform going on right now because in the last 20 years, health costs have doubled here in the United States. And they've grown to be 16% of our gross national product. So that's reflective of the fact that 2/3 of Americans have some form of chronic disease. Some of these disease rates themselves have doubled, diabetes most notably, infant diseases especially. And so something is obviously wrong with our culture's taking care of our health and well-being. And this is something that's actually been brewing for pretty much I would say at least a century, but actually longer. And the notable event was the introduction of mass amounts of chemicals into our environment beginning in the middle of the 20th century. That was because, well, let me put it this way. Often when we see the problems of pollution, of environmental devastation, of releasing products into the trade, the general consumer market, we often point our fingers and we say, oh, you know, this person's responsible. It's this legislator who didn't pass the right regulations, or it's this businessman or this corporate officer or head of or CEO who is so greedy and so unethical that they released this product and now people are suffering as a result. But actually, the cause, in my opinion, is much deeper. And I can't explain it all in 5 or 10 minutes, but the really important things that happen in our lives come from the inside out. So what that tells you is that if something is really seriously wrong with our environment, something also has to be at fault or has to be in disarray in our inner world. Because human beings are quite powerful. Animals and plants also have a degree of control and ability to change their immediate environments, but human beings have an extraordinary ability to do that. We can release atomic weapons and destroy a whole continent if we wanted to. So, but also something inside allows us to be able to do that. And so what is wrong with the internal world is really what we need to look at. And our inner world is part of our organic nature. We are organisms. So what's unique about an organism is that it's a whole organism. That's why we call it organic. It organizes itself. If you cut a whole organism apart and it dies, it stays whole. Well, there's an organic nature to our inner life where that organic nature tries to pull together a whole sense of the universe and organize it and make all the parts of everything fit, make sense. There's no contradictions. You know, we feel at ease. We're not stressed out by things not making sense. You know, so that's why when you have culture as a whole, we'll try to have an organic sense of the world we live in, and these things don't change very much because they're the whole foundation of our collective consciousness of the world. Back in the 17th century, there was a huge change in that organic sense of the universe. There's something I call a central paradigm, which is the core ideology of how a culture organizes its worldview. And in medieval times, God, the biblical concept of God, the biblical image of God, the biblical inspiration of God, the spiritual role of God served as a central paradigm. What does that mean? It means that God was beneath everything and in everything. And God made the rules. And if something was to happen in the world, it was God's doing. And if a monarch got appointed to rule a nation, it was because a pope ordained ultimately to be a spokesman for God gave that power to the monarch, to the king of England, to the Tsar of Russia, to the ruler of France. And that's how the medieval world functioned. And then a change happened, and as the worldview changed, so did the political world, and the shift was to the scientific worldview. And as a result of that, as that shift happened, we had the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution and the American Revolution, because the old order was kicked out. But the change happened within. There was a change in the organic sense of the universe. And the shift was to what is now the math-centered vision of nature. Now, one of the primary tenets of that vision is that it is not an ideology, that it is not a metaphysics, that it is not a belief system. It is a way of really rawly looking at the world as it is. So you go into a laboratory and you measure something and you say this wavelength is so long. Well, that gives you the objective knowledge of how the world's, of that, what that light wave really is. So any kind of worldview has to have, in order for it to prosper, has to have a fundamental belief system behind it, and the mathematical worldview certainly does. Now, it's my contention, mind you, that that worldview is an ideology, is a metaphysics, and a very powerful one, one that digs very, very deep into the core of nature, actually is close to expressing a raw wisdom about nature, so close that it appears to be the raw wisdom, and therefore, but is not, and therefore represents a huge danger both to ourselves and to our planet. And you see that danger when math-designed chemicals begin to proliferate. Originally, the Industrial Revolution, which was based on that worldview, had a positive impact. The reason for that is because it didn't dig deep into the core of nature. It created machines which had a double negative impact. They replaced the need to do mechanical chores. So we're negating what is mechanical in order to create a positive for life. And one of the ramifications of that was the abolishment of slavery, was the fact that now we had machines that could do mechanical chores. Now we could travel at great speeds, we could communicate at great speeds, we could do all kinds of things that the industrial and later the technological revolution provided us. But as chemistry developed and physics and allowed us to use that symbolism to dig more deeply into the core of nature, certain things began to go wrong. The invention of atomic weapons and the proliferation of chemicals. Today we have approximately 4 million chemicals that have been designed, envisioned, spoken about in scientific literature since just the middle of the 20th century. We have 150,000 pharmaceuticals that have been indexed. We have 100,000 other industrial and commercial chemicals in use. We have about 20,000 that the EPA says are not assimilable by our body, that are not easily metabolized. And we have about 10,000 in our food production. We have about 1,000 that enter into our bodies, and we can't get rid of. They have a long half-life. They can stay there for decades, are toxic, carcinogenic, and have created an epidemic crisis. But the problem really is that we've chosen a universal worldview that literally can universally penetrate all of nature, but actually, in my opinion, is a false metaphysics of nature. And whenever you have a paradigm that people believe in profoundly, and this creates an ideology, the ideology blinds them. And you can see that my metaphor for that is going into a nursing home and watching Alzheimer's patients being given multiple drugs and seeing them go into lower and lower states of consciousness as a result. And the doctors are in denial. Oh, there's a cure just around the corner. Oh, chemistry will still come to the rescue. Chemistry will create a better life, but actually it won't, because the whole ideology is false. Now it would take another video to explain what's false about that ideology, but I have to wrap it up. I just want to tell you that this is really the core basis of what we are telling people around the planet at Raw Wisdom, that we can make this global mind change, that we can make this paradigm shift, save the planet, unpollute ourselves, and that's what we're up to. So.